90% of manufacturing data remains unused. So that's a significant asset that's not being leveraged at all.
Techsauce Global, sparking innovative thoughts. Swadika, welcome to another episode of Techsauce Global Podcast. I'm Chaworat-Yong Jiranonarpupe, your host as always. And of course, I'm an editor at the Techsauce Media Company. Now, as always, we always talk about things that are of a concern with the startup or the tech sector. And one of the things that definitely is a major concern here in Thailand is how is the economy doing? And one of the major contributors to that is the manufacturing sector. Today, we're going to take a look at how digital transformation has taken place in the sector, along with updates from a leading company that I'm sure all of us know, and that is IBM. I'm so happy to have Paul Burton, the general manager of IBM Asia Pacific, with me today. He's responsible for all strategic and operational matters related to IBM sales, marketing, services, and delivery operations across Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia, Korea, India, the Greater China region, including Hong Kong and Taiwan. Hello, Paul.
Hello, how are you?
Hello. I'm so happy that we get to talk with you today. Hi, Paul. Definitely we're very excited to hear about IBM and what you've been up to. But first, let's talk about what's happened so far in the Asia Pacific market in the past 3 years, especially with the pandemic. What have you seen so far as major changes?
Well, I think when we step back and look at it, there's really been, I can probably put my fingers on three major changes as a result of the pandemic. First, there's certainly more focus now on supply chain resiliency than perhaps there was prior to the pandemic. The pandemic has certainly exposed the fragility and the inherent efficiencies of traditional supply chains. And quite frankly, industries were caught off guard and routine operations were impacted. I think we probably all can think back 2 or 3 years and recall that. As consumers, we all have our personal stories to tell, but the most visible impact was probably the medical equipment supply chain, as demand skyrocketed for masks, personal protective equipment, and even hospital beds. The supply chain struggled. The pandemic nearly, clearly moved the issue of supply chain resiliency to the forefront, and companies became much, much more aware of how global risk and uncertainty affects supply chains. We saw that not just, in medical, but in, tech manufacturing, really across the board. The second thing I'd probably point to would be changes, and this is probably near and dear to everybody, changes in shopping and lifestyle and consumer behavior. Social distancing, lockdowns, other measures led consumers to change their behavior to online shopping, heightened social media use, internet, telephony and teleconferencing. Zoom really came into vogue at that point in time, as well as other teleconferencing platforms, and streaming of films and videos and all sorts of media and entertainment. Online shopping was already growing, particularly in Thailand at the time, but the pandemic really accelerated the trend with a massive increase in the number of people ordering, everything from groceries to clothing to household supplies online. The beginning of the pandemic, the first half of 2021, Thailand, achieved 68% growth in e-commerce. And that was something like a 51% year-over-year increase in the digital economy, or something like $30 billion in 2021. So that's pretty significant. Even McKinsey, I think, reported that Asian consumers are expected to account for half of global consumption growth in the next decade, equivalent to something like $10 trillion in opportunity. So the pandemic has really drawn new consumer map, period, across the board. Those are really the big changes that we're seeing.
And it's very important to note that a lot of the changes that you said have been the evolution of a lot of things from learning or adapting to the situation, which leads me to my next point is that, the important lessons that have been learned, specifically in your field, the information business during the pandemic. How has, the IBM handled the situation?
Well, as I mentioned briefly, the pandemic exposed the fragility of supply chains, fragmentation of business operations, the need for business to be more flexible and resilient. All of those things really stood out, and technology expertise became probably more important, than ever. Because things needed to happen without people necessarily going into the office. So automation and all sorts of things became, really important. But I would say a couple things. One, you got to evaluate the disruptions and the impact on supply chain, and you got to bring technology to help clients and manage and mitigate risk. During the very first month of the pandemic, we launched the Rapid Supplier Connect, a platform to connect government and hospital procurement officers with manufacturers that had switched their production lines to manufacture medical supplies and personal protective equipment. This Rapid Supplier Connect platform uses a blockchain-based infrastructure to verify more than 200 suppliers, that they have so far signed up for the platform to sell face masks, boot covers, and other protective equipment. So disruptions impact the supply chain. You really got to evaluate those. Second, I would say business continuity is huge. Businesses needed to learn very quickly how to operate in this new environment. So, though being limited by a long period of enhanced community quarantine, we were able to help clients like Mitsubishi Motors in the Philippines transform processes across the operation and vehicle supply chain through the successful implementation of a vehicle management system. In Thailand, as an example, we were able to help a major telco operator modernize and migrate applications to the public cloud during the pandemic. The modernization was completed, pretty quickly and helped support the government, during the vaccine rollout just last year. And then finally, I would say agility and resiliency, equipping clients with technology that supports, future scenarios, being equipped and, positioned for the future. We worked with Siam Kubota as an example, a leader in farm and industrial machinery in ASEAN, to transform its planning, budgeting, and forecasting and analysis to build accurate forecasts and react to the farmers and agricultural challenges in a more sustainable way. The idea is to, synchronize planning across business units and over 70 data sources. This synchronizing the data and synchronizing the intelligence across all these data sources, we are able to provide a holistic view of performance with operational plans automatically updating financial results. So I think this idea of integrating everything, getting a complete view from start to finish, agility, technology, looking at the supply chain holistically, these are all very important things that we got involved in, with our clients, from the start of the pandemic, and remain so engaged even today.
That's a big transition. Definitely a lot of details when it comes to making that happen. Now, of course, you've been hands-on with a lot of different countries in the region. But for those who specifically want to know more or learn more about the manufacturing sector in Thailand, in your opinion, what are the potential factors that should be considered for Thai manufacturers right now?
Well, I think digital transformation remains huge. I mean, this idea of digitally transforming your operations and automating them, to increase business velocity and throughput for a traditional or manufacturing change is huge. Pandemic recovery accelerated this whole process. If you look at APAC today, something like 2/3, approximately plus or minus a little bit, but something like 2/3 of APAC GDP is now coming from digitally transforming enterprises and governments. Something like a $1.2 trillion opportunity in the next year or two. And so this idea of automating, using data, using AI, adapting processes to these new technologies, that's what digital transformation is all about. And it's a huge opportunity. And as it happens, inefficiencies are being taken out of supply chains, and efficiencies increase, prices go down, and better service all around. An example might be the Thailand Board of Investment estimated that the country's digital economy is poised for greater growth and is expected to constitute something like 25% of Thailand's gross domestic product by 2027. So even Thailand is growing pretty substantially So, I think you can look at that. You can look at the fact that Thailand continues to be and is positioned as a top manufacturing hub with the country's Industry 4.0 roadmap as a driver for sustainable growth. Um, the manufacturing sector in Thailand, I think, was something like 27% of Thai GDP in 2021. We would expect this certainly to increase, right? And there's a high number of installations of industrial robots and automation and industrial robots in Thailand. I think this is only second to Singapore. Thailand has a 4.0 strategy that aims to transform the country into an innovation and knowledge-based digital hub in Southeast Asia. So there's just a lot going on in Thailand that needs to be paid attention to. But again, it's all around automation, digitization, robotics, data, AI. Those are the big things that are happening in manufacturing in Thailand, I think.
When you get into the details of the technology integration into the manufacturing business, where are we at right now? Of course, when you say that there needs to be digitization, there needs to be the integration of AI, blockchain, that is quite a lot to do. At what point or what progress are we at right now for manufacturers, do you see?
Well, I think there's still a lot of untapped manufacturing data out there. Supply chains or manufacturing plants, they throw off a tremendous amount of data just through their normal operations. So I think the number that I recently saw, something like 2,200 terabytes of data can be generated each month, from a single production line in a modern manufacturing plant. So, that's a lot of data to analyze and glean intelligence from. Breaking it down a little bit, plants typically use alarm mechanisms that collect data to detect production abnormalities for quality control. But 90% of manufacturing data remains unused. So that's a significant asset that's not being leveraged at all. Manufacturers emphasize on capturing data for historical reporting as opposed to using data to predict future events or improve decision making. It's great that you're doing reporting after the fact, but perhaps you can analyze that data in real time and get more value out of it. A quarter of organizations are capturing sensor data and using it for decision making, in a particularly meaningful way. Only a quarter. There's a 75% that could probably improve there, and only a quarter of organizations are optimizing asset and equipment maintenance schedules, based on analysis of failure modes. And looking at things like balancing reliability versus cost. So there's a lot of predictive work that can be done in that area. There's also decision-making capabilities. We could talk about, in many instances, decision-making is inhibited by manufacturing processes and sustainable operations. Production data is just, can be mined, analyzed, and used to help, but it's not. So, for example, 3 in 10 organizations consistently use data from equipment, processes, and systems to draw insights for continuous process and improvement. But fewer than 1 in 5 have real-time access to important manufacturing data across the enterprise. So there's quite a disparity there. Very low numbers in terms of leveraging and exploiting data. Manufacturers could analyze warranty claims to determine breakdowns in the manufacturing process. However, data science expertise and specialized tools are required to prepare and manipulate and analyze this unstructured data. So, another question is, is the skills gap or a lack of skills getting in the way of this? So that's sort of an open question, not just in Thailand, by the way, but I think that's an open question across the region. Sustainability, of course, is a top manufacturing objective. Organizations struggle to report on and make decisions about sustainability without proper data and metrics. So, I think one of the things I should have mentioned probably a little bit earlier is that, during the pandemic, sustainability has become a bigger issue as people have worked at home and had time to reflect on lifestyle and other issues. And sustainability has really peaked up. But one of the big issues, of course, is, do we have a baseline of how our actions today are impacting sustainability? What's our sustainability score, as an example? So I think there's probably a lot of work that can be done there. And then the last thing I'd probably point out is, unsophisticated technology environments. Technological barriers or inflexible legacy systems are identified as 2 of the most, significant manufacturing barriers. Executives continue to identify a combination of three technologies that are important to advancing manufacturing objectives. So we can name them, AI to generate insights, security technologies, to protect, manufacturing infrastructure, particularly technology, and then of course cloud computing. So these three things are important as well. So there's really a lot going on, that we can point to, but I think it all comes down to, automation, technology, digitization, process improvement. All these things need to come together, and of course, don't ever forget about skills and skills gaps that may exist to employ these technologies and generate these benefits.
A lot to be done, but a lot of potential as well. Given the data that we have, but when you set out to do these goals or complete these goals, there are challenges as always. Each market has their own unique challenges. In Thailand, definitely, I'm sure, as you hinted there's things that we share as well with other regions in terms of a talent gap, and also the economic downturn right now. Can you share a little bit about the main challenges that you see right now that the Thai industrial sector needs to overcome?
Well, I would say strategic partnerships with industry partners, industry experts, technology providers. This idea of an ecosystem is increasingly important. No one company, no one person these days has the expertise needed to solve every problem, much less in many cases any problem. So you're going to have to bring ecosystems together, partners, technology partners, process partners, industry partners, partners with specific niche expertise, and form teams almost in an ad hoc fashion for the purpose of accomplishing something important. So at IBM, for example, we focus on an ecosystem-led approach to help support clients in industrial and the manufacturing sector, integrating partner products and intellectual capital. Augmenting those things, of course, with IBM technologies and hopefully, next generation manufacturing capabilities. There certainly seems to be a growing role for partners from an IBM perspective, because every client that's on a digital transformation journey, which is pretty much every client these days, they want specialization that no one vendor can provide. I mentioned that a moment ago. No one knows everything, so you got to build teams. You got to do it in an agile, ad hoc fashion. So this idea of creating shared value for clients and a shared vision is extremely important. And of course, a lot of that involves, hybrid cloud and AI, to the extent that we're talking about, manufacturing and having modern, manufacturing chains, driven by, modern technology, hybrid cloud, AI, so we can get cost and productivity benefits. So those are certainly things that I would point out that most manufacturers, but certainly manufacturers in Thailand, could benefit, and adapt to.
Do you have some hesitancy when you speak with manufacturers on investing in the area? I mean, of course, everyone knows that there is importance into investing in it, but given the economic situation now, do you see any hesitancy?
I think that's an interesting question. I think if you just have a conceptual conversation with people about the need for digital transformation, cloud, AI, hybrid cloud, automation, cybersecurity, we could, list all the topics. I think if you just have a conceptual conversation with executives on these topics, there's no disagreement at all. They all agree how important they are and how necessary they are. But then when it comes time to, making hard decisions and prioritizing projects and monies, and capital investments, sometimes the results vary industry by industry. So I think at the end of the day, I think it comes down to the leadership of the particular company or the enterprise. And I think forward-looking leaders are understanding that investing in digital infrastructure and digital capabilities is something that's going to, give you competitive advantage well into the future. And I think more interesting, or perhaps startling, perhaps for some, is that whoever invests first and gets themselves out on that journey, they start to increase the distance between themselves and their competitors in terms of performance and ability, to adapt to an environment that, quite frankly, is changing very rapidly and perhaps susceptible to disruption at any particular point in time. I don't think anyone saw the pandemic coming, but it came, and those that adapted very quickly, and effectively, I think did quite well, and others not so well. So I think, leadership has a lot to do with it, but it's not just leadership in terms of a domain perspective or a particular industry's perspective. It's really, thinking holistically about your company, your industry, the environment, and all sorts of risks that may have been, let's say exogenous to your thinking before, or exogenous to your strategic posture before, but now need to be integrated into it from a planning perspective. And so I think these are big issues for CEOs these days.
And you mentioned there. I just wanted to follow up a little bit about you talking about talent. Obviously, in these new areas, it's like, of course, very, not even this region, but around the world, hard to find and retain a good talent to help make that transition. What is your advice, or what are some solutions that you've seen that could be applied here in Thailand?
In terms of developing talent, I
Yeah,
think,
or retaining it, for that transition.
yeah, I think I think continue it. I think you have to invest. I think I would urge companies, and I think companies really need to think hard about how they invest in human capital. I think companies that, attracting and retaining talent is a difficult task. It's much easier to retain it once you have it, but then of course you've got to invest in it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to retain it. And so I think continuous training, continuous opportunities for the employee, challenging opportunities, articulable, um, career growth opportunities. I think all of these things are very, very important. And I think companies really need to invest in them. They really need to think through their strategy, holistically.
Okay. And let's take a look at the concept of Industry 4.0, and how Thai manufacturers should adapt to fit into this concept. But can you give us your perspective of this concept, and how it can be possible in addition to what you just said?
Well, I think Industry 4.0, is all about leveraging, new technologies that exist today and ones that are coming that we can, some of them will anticipate and some of them we won't. And so I think it goes back to the point I made a little bit earlier, about this idea about ecosystems. No one's going to know everything, and no one's going to be able to contribute everything. And so you're going to have to form ad hoc teams, of partners that have different, expertise. So I think, an interesting idea in Thailand, for example, is Triple Dot Consulting, which is an IBM business partner. They brought AI powered enterprise asset management solutions to help manage high value assets for electric power plants of the electricity generating authority of Thailand, which I believe is Thailand's third largest, or a large power producer in Thailand. So this had a pretty significant impact. 30% decreased inventory carrying costs. So there's some significant quantitative benefits that came as a result of this. But they didn't do it all by themselves. That's the whole point. It's an IBM business partner. It worked with our technology, but they obviously had domain expertise, and then obviously the electricity generating authority of Thailand itself contributed tremendously as well. So I think you got to bring all of this together, and you got to make it work, but it's got to be aligned on a particular objective. Teams don't form for no purpose at all. They form to accomplish something, right?
Yeah, yeah, collaboration, but then with a focus, a goal that everyone on board kind of is clearly, has a clear vision of what needs to be done, right? And
hmm
talking about IBM, how, can you give us the updates on how you have been working to help businesses go through this digital transformation process successfully?
Well, I think it comes down to, working with. I think it comes down to working with our with the chief executives and others in the business unit to really understand what their objectives are, and how they're being challenged by this, somewhat novel environment that's not so novel anymore, because I think we're sort of getting used to it at this point. And so I think there are always opportunities to find novel approaches to old problems, and perhaps use old approaches to novel problems. I mean, it really varies, but I think it always comes down and it's increasingly coming down in this world of digitization to, automation, AI, and other technologies that you can bring to bear to give maximum agility, but also maximum resiliency to business processes that companies have. So I think that's really the key.
And just to wrap things up, a lot of people who are listening to us right now are coming from different backgrounds, whether they're startups or companies, corporates who are listening in, whether in Thailand or overseas. What is the key takeaway that you'd like to leave this conversation with, in terms of the integration of technology, the importance of it here in the region?
Well, I think you can't fully leverage technology unless you relook your business processes. And so you can deploy any technology you want, but unless you're going to adapt your business processes to the capabilities of the technology and the potential of the technology, you're not going to get a full return on that investment. So I don't think you can look at technology in a vacuum. I think you got to look at it in conjunction with how you do business, what your business processes are. And then, of course, you've got to evaluate all of that in terms of specific objectives that your leadership has for the business. So I think it starts out with business objectives, looking at the processes and technologies that you need to deploy to meet those objectives with an eye towards automation, AI, which almost necessarily means, getting into a hybrid cloud environment. And then I think that's really where it's at today.
Okay, I'm so excited to see where we're going to go, given the great potential that we have here in Thailand, and also, we're excited to see the latest progresses coming from IBM as well. Paul Burton, thank you so much for being with us here today in our podcast. ขอบคุณมากค่ะ And this has been yet another recording of Techsauce Global Podcast. Thank you for listening. And of course, we aim to give you more interesting topics in our next episode. See you next time. สวัสดีค่ะ Techsauce, sparking innovative thoughts.